A black child asked me for $2 for medicine. When I followed him home, I was shocked by what I discovered. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. James Wilson observed the numbers on his laptop as the glow of business success began to lose its charm, an emptiness that no bank account could fill. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, the city skyline cast long shadows as the November afternoon faded into gray. 20 years to the day since he'd left the streets of Detroit behind, and yet here he was, feeling more adrift than ever. Fourth quarter projections are exceeding expectations by 17%, Mr. Wilson, his assistant Claire recited from her tablet. The board is particularly pleased with the cost-cutting initiatives from last month. James nodded absently, his eyes fixed on the spreadsheet before him. Wilson Financial Solutions had become one of the most profitable investment firms in the country under his leadership. His perfectly tailored suit, the art on his walls worth more than most people's homes, the respect that came with his position, all the trappings of success he'd fought so hard to achieve, and none of it seemed to matter anymore. The board meeting starts in 15 minutes, Claire reminded him. They're expecting your proposal for additional overhead reductions. More cuts, James muttered, closing his laptop. Always more cuts. That's business, Claire replied with practiced efficiency. Shall I prepare the conference room? James rose from his ergonomic chair, straightening his tie. Yes, I'll be there shortly. After Claire left, he walked to the window and pressed his forehead against the cool glass. Below, people scurried like ants, their lives intersecting for brief moments before continuing on their separate paths. What was he doing here? Creating wealth from wealth, moving numbers from one column to another, while feeling increasingly hollow inside. 20 minutes later, James sat at the head of a gleaming conference table, surrounded by board members in nearly identical suits, all nodding as he outlined yet another strategy to increase shareholder value. By reducing staff in customer service and outsourcing to contractors, we can improve our bottom line by an additional 12% next quarter, he heard himself saying, the words leaving a bitter taste. Richard Collins, his ambitious vice president, leaned forward eagerly. We could push that to 15% if we eliminate the retirement matching for lower-tier employees. Something in James snapped. These aren't just numbers, Richard. They're people with families, bills, dreams. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Thomas Ferguson, the eldest board member, cleared his throat. We appreciate your humanitarian concerns, James, but we have a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders. Of course, James replied, the familiar corporate speak flowing automatically. I'll have the complete reduction plan on your desks by Monday. The meeting concluded with handshakes and smiles that didn't reach anyone's eyes. James escaped to his office, loosened his tie, and grabbed his coat. I'm stepping out for some air, Claire. Cancel my afternoon. But you have the investor call at... Cancel it, he said firmly, already heading toward the elevator. Outside, the November chill bit through his expensive wool coat. James walked without direction, his mind churning with questions he'd been avoiding for months. What was the point of all this success if it felt so empty? Who was he helping, really? When had he become just another suit, perpetuating a system he once despised? Lost in thought, he barely registered the small figure approaching until the boy stood directly in his path. Excuse me, mister. Can you spare $2? James blinked, focusing on the child before him. The boy couldn't be more than 10 years old, with serious eyes and a worn jacket too thin for the weather. James had passed countless panhandlers before without a second glance, but something about this child's direct gaze made him pause. $2? James repeated. Most people asked for spare change or a few bucks. The specific amount seemed unusual. Yes, sir. I need exactly $2. The boy didn't whine or shuffle. He stood straight, looking James in the eye. "What's your name?" "Marcus," the boy replied after a moment's hesitation. "What do you need $2 for, Marcus?" Marcus shifted slightly. "Medicine. For my grandmother." James had heard countless stories on the streets, usually fabrications to trigger sympathy. But the dignity in the boy's stance, the absence of self-pity in his voice, made James consider him more carefully. In those determined eyes, James saw a reflection of himself decades ago, desperate but refusing to be defeated. "Medicine costs more than $2, James said, not unkindly. "I know. I have some already. I just need $2 more. Marcus's gaze didn't waver. James reached for his wallet, then stopped. "How about I walk with you to get this medicine, instead of just giving you the money?" Wariness flashed across Marcus's face. "Why would you do that?" "Maybe I want to make sure the money goes where you say it will," James replied, then softened his tone. "Or maybe I just need a walk with some purpose today." Marcus considered this, studying James with a maturity beyond his years. "Okay," he finally agreed. "The pharmacy's not far." They walked side by side, an odd pair, the successful executive and the small boy in worn clothes. James slowed his stride to match Marcus's pace. "So your grandmother is sick?" James asked carefully. "Yes. She has diabetes. She needs her medicine every day." "And your parents?" Marcus's face closed slightly. "Don't have any. It's just me and Grandma Eleonora." "That's a beautiful name, Eleonora." "She's named after a queen," Marcus offered, a hint of pride breaking through his reserve. "She knows lots of things. She used to be a teacher's aide before she got sick." "And you take care of her now?" Marcus nodded. "Somebody has to." As they continued walking, James felt something shift inside him. This child, carrying adult responsibilities without complaint, possessed a strength that made his own struggles seem trivial by comparison. The pharmacy was a small, independent establishment in a neighborhood that had seen better days. As they entered, the pharmacist looked up and recognition crossed his face. "Back again, Marcus," the pharmacist said kindly. "Same prescription for your grandmother?" "Yes, Mr. Phillips," Marcus replied, pulling out a crumpled collection of bills and coins from his pocket. "I have all but $2 today." James stepped forward. "How much is the full prescription?" Mr. Phillips looked at him curiously. "It's $87.50 for the month's supply." Without hesitation, James pulled out his wallet. "I'll cover the entire cost." "Sir, you don't have to," Marcus began. "I know I don't have to," James cut in gently. "I want to." While Mr. Phillips filled the prescription, James noticed Marcus watching him with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. What was this boy's life like, collecting money penny by penny, carrying responsibilities that would crush most adults? "Thank you," Marcus said simply when they left the pharmacy, the medication securely in his backpack. "You're welcome," James replied, then made a decision that went against his better judgment. "Would you mind if I walked you home, just to make sure you get there safely?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "I guess that's okay. It's not far." As they walked deeper into the neighborhood, the surroundings grew increasingly dilapidated. Boarded-up storefronts, graffiti-covered walls, and suspicious glances followed them. James, in his designer suit and coat, stood out like a beacon. "You don't belong here," Marcus said quietly, noticing his discomfort. "I used to," James replied, surprising himself with the admission. "A long time ago." Marcus glanced at him, curiosity evident, but asked no further questions. After several blocks, Marcus turned down an alley. "This is a shortcut," he explained. James followed, his instincts on high alert. Halfway through the narrow passage, 3 men appeared at the other end. One of them stepped forward, his eyes narrowing at the sight of James. "Who's this little man?" the man asked Marcus, his tone deceptively casual while his eyes remained fixed on James. You bringing cops around here now? I'm not police, James said evenly, just walking the boy home. The man moved closer, looking James up and down. In that suit, nobody dresses like that around here unless they're cops or trouble. He helped me get Grandma's medicine, Marcus interjected quickly. He's not trouble. The man ignored him, suddenly shoving James against the brick wall. You wearing a wire? You recording? I told you I'm not a cop, James managed, the man's forearm pressing against his throat. I'm just making sure the kid gets home safely. Leave him alone, Dion, Marcus shouted, his small voice echoing in the alley. He paid for Grandma's medicine, all of it. Dion's pressure eased slightly as he glanced at Marcus. The whole prescription? Yeah, Marcus confirmed. He's just being nice. Dion studied James for a long moment before releasing him. People like you don't come to neighborhoods like this to be nice, he said, backing away slowly. Whatever you're looking for, find it and get out. You don't belong here. As quickly as they had appeared, Dion and his companions retreated, leaving James shaken but relieved. He straightened his coat with trembling hands. Sorry about that, Marcus said. Dion's not so bad, he just watches out for the neighborhood. Is that what he calls it? James muttered, adjusting his tie. Come on, Marcus urged. We're almost there. They continued to a run-down apartment building with crumbling concrete steps. Inside, the hallway smelled of dampness and old cooking. Marcus led the way up 3 flights of stairs, the elevator clearly out of service. This is us, he said, stopping at apartment 3E. He produced a key from his pocket and opened the door. Grandma, I'm back with your medicine. James followed him into a small but meticulously clean apartment. Despite the peeling paint and worn furniture, someone had taken great care to make this place a home. Books lined makeshift shelves and faded photographs hung on the walls. Who's with you, child? A weak voice called from the living room. James stepped around the corner and froze at the sight of an elderly woman lying on a hospital bed that had been set up in the small living room. She was thin and frail, an IV stand beside her, but her eyes were sharp and alert. Those eyes widened in shock as they fixed on James. Wilson? James Wilson? You don't remember me, but I worked for your parents before they divorced. I used to hold you on my lap when you were smaller than Marcus. Fourth quarter projections are exceeding expectations by 17%, Mr. Wilson, his assistant Claire recited from her tablet. The board is particularly pleased with the cost-cutting initiatives from last month. James nodded absently, his eyes fixed on the spreadsheet before him. Wilson Financial Solutions had become one of the most profitable investment firms in the country under his leadership. His perfectly tailored suit, the art on his walls worth more than most people's homes, the respect that came with his position. All the trappings of success he'd fought so hard to achieve. And none of it seemed to matter anymore. The board meeting starts in 15 minutes, Claire reminded him. They're expecting your proposal for additional overhead reductions. More cuts, James muttered, closing his laptop. Always more cuts. That's business, Claire replied with practiced efficiency. Shall I prepare the conference room? James rose from his ergonomic chair, straightening his tie. Yes, I'll be there shortly. After Claire left, he walked to the window and pressed his forehead against the cool glass. Below, people scurried like ants, their lives intersecting for brief moments before continuing on their separate paths. What was he doing here? Creating wealth from wealth, moving numbers from one column to another while feeling increasingly hollow inside. 20 minutes later, James sat at the head of a gleaming conference table, surrounded by board members in nearly identical suits, all nodding as he outlined yet another strategy to increase shareholder value. By reducing staff in customer service and outsourcing to contractors, we can improve our bottom line by an additional 12% next quarter, he heard himself saying, the words leaving a bitter taste. Richard Collins, his ambitious vice president, leaned forward eagerly. We could push that to 15% if we eliminate the retirement matching for lower-tier employees. Something in James snapped. These aren't just numbers, Richard. They're people with families, bills, dreams. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Thomas Ferguson, the eldest board member, cleared his throat. We appreciate your humanitarian concerns, James, but we have a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders. Of course, James replied, the familiar corporate speak flowing automatically. I'll have the complete reduction plan on your desks by Monday. The meeting concluded with handshakes and smiles that didn't reach anyone's eyes. James escaped to his office, loosened his tie, and grabbed his coat. I'm stepping out for some air, Claire. Cancel my afternoon. But you have the investor call at... Cancel it, he said firmly, already heading toward the elevator. Outside, the November chill bit through his expensive wool coat. James walked without direction, his mind churning with questions he'd been avoiding for months. What was the point of all this success if it felt so empty? Who was he helping, really? When had he become just another suit perpetuating a system he once despised? Lost in thought, he barely registered the small figure approaching until the boy stood directly in his path. Excuse me, mister? Can you spare $2? James blinked, focusing on the child before him. The boy couldn't be more than 10 years old, with serious eyes and a worn jacket too thin for the weather. James had passed countless panhandlers before without a second glance, but something about this child's direct gaze made him pause. $2? James repeated. Most people asked for spare change or a few bucks. The specific amount seemed unusual. Yes, sir, I need exactly $2. The boy didn't whine or shuffle. He stood straight, looking James in the eye. What's your name? Marcus, the boy replied after a moment's hesitation. What do you need $2 for, Marcus? Marcus shifted slightly. Medicine. For my grandmother. James had heard countless stories on the streets, usually fabrications to trigger sympathy. But the dignity in the boy's stance, the absence of self-pity in his voice, made James consider him more carefully. In those determined eyes, James saw a reflection of himself decades ago, desperate but refusing to be defeated. Medicine costs more than $2, James said, not unkindly. I know. I have some already. I just need $2 more. Marcus's gaze didn't waver. James reached for his wallet, then stopped. How about I walk with you to get this medicine, instead of just giving you the money? Wariness flashed across Marcus's face. Why would you do that? Maybe I want to make sure the money goes where you say it will, James replied, then softened his tone. Or maybe I just need a walk with some purpose today. Marcus considered this, studying James with a maturity beyond his years. Okay, he finally agreed. The pharmacy's not far. They walked side by side, an odd pair, the successful executive and the small boy in worn clothes. James slowed his stride to match Marcus's pace. So, your grandmother is sick? James asked carefully. Yes, she has diabetes. She needs her medicine every day. And your parents? Marcus's face closed slightly. Don't have any. It's just me and Grandma Eleonora. That's a beautiful name. Eleonora. She's named after a queen, Marcus offered, a hint of pride breaking through his reserve. She knows lots of things. She used to be a teacher's aide before she got sick. And you take care of her now? Marcus nodded. Somebody has to. As they continued walking, James felt something shift inside him. This child, carrying adult responsibilities without complaint, possessed a strength that made his own struggles seem trivial by comparison. The pharmacy was a small, independent establishment in a neighborhood that had seen better days. As they entered, the pharmacist looked up, and recognition crossed his face. Back again, Marcus, the pharmacist said kindly. Same prescription for your grandmother? Yes, Mr. Phillips, Marcus replied, pulling out a crumpled collection of bills and coins from his pocket. "I have all but $2 today." James stepped forward. "How much is the full prescription?" Mr. Phillips looked at him curiously. "It's $87.50 for the month's supply." Without hesitation, James pulled out his wallet. "I'll cover the entire cost." "Sir, you don't have to," Marcus began. "I know I don't have to," James cut in gently. "I want to." While Mr. Phillips filled the prescription, James noticed Marcus watching him with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. What was this boy's life like? Collecting money penny by penny, carrying responsibilities that would crush most adults? "Thank you," Marcus said simply when they left the pharmacy, the medication securely in his backpack. "You're welcome," James replied, then made a decision that went against his better judgment. "Would you mind if I walked you home, just to make sure you get there safely?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "I guess that's okay. It's not far." As they walked deeper into the neighborhood, the surroundings grew increasingly dilapidated. Boarded-up storefronts, graffiti-covered walls, and suspicious glances followed them. James, in his designer suit and coat, stood out like a beacon. "You don't belong here," Marcus said quietly, noticing his discomfort. "I used to," James replied, surprising himself with the admission. "A long time ago." Marcus glanced at him, curiosity evident, but asked no further questions. After several blocks, Marcus turned down an alley. "This is a shortcut," he explained. James followed, his instincts on high alert. Halfway through the narrow passage, 3 men appeared at the other end. One of them stepped forward, his eyes narrowing at the sight of James. "Who's this, little man?" the man asked Marcus, his tone deceptively casual while his eyes remained fixed on James. "You bringing cops around here now?" "I'm not police," James said evenly. "Just walking the boy home." The man moved closer, looking James up and down. "In that suit? Nobody dresses like that around here unless they're cops or trouble." "He helped me get Grandma's medicine," Marcus interjected quickly. "He's not trouble." The man ignored him, suddenly shoving James against the brick wall. "You wearing a wire? You recording?" "I told you, I'm not a cop," James managed, the man's forearm pressing against his throat. "I'm just making sure the kid gets home safely." "Leave him alone, Dion," Marcus shouted, his small voice echoing in the alley. "He paid for Grandma's medicine, all of it." Dion's pressure eased slightly as he glanced at Marcus. "The whole prescription?" "Yeah," Marcus confirmed. "He's just being nice." Dion studied James for a long moment before releasing him. "People like you don't come to neighborhoods like this to be nice," he said, backing away slowly. "Whatever you're looking for, find it and get out. You don't belong here." As quickly as they had appeared, Dion and his companions retreated, leaving James shaken but relieved. He straightened his coat with trembling hands. "Sorry about that," Marcus said. "Dion's not so bad. He just watches out for the neighborhood." "Is that what he calls it?" James muttered, adjusting his tie. "Come on," Marcus urged. "We're almost there." They continued to a run-down apartment building with crumbling concrete steps. Inside, the hallway smelled of dampness and old cooking. Marcus led the way up 3 flights of stairs, the elevator clearly out of service. "This is us," he said, stopping at apartment 3E. He produced a key from his pocket and opened the door. "Grandma, I'm back with your medicine." James followed him into a small but meticulously clean apartment. Despite the peeling paint and worn furniture, someone had taken great care to make this place a home. Books lined makeshift shelves and faded photographs hung on the walls. "Who's with you, child?" a weak voice called from the living room. James stepped around the corner and froze at the sight of an elderly woman lying on a hospital bed that had been set up in the small living room. She was thin and frail, an IV stand beside her, but her eyes were sharp and alert. Those eyes widened in shock as they fixed on James. Wilson. James Wilson. You don't remember me, but I worked for your parents before they divorced. I used to hold you on my lap when you were smaller than Marcus. James stared at Eleonora, stunned by her words. The room seemed to tilt slightly as he grasped the edge of a nearby chair for support. Fragments of childhood memories, a kind voice, the smell of lemon and lavender, gentle hands, flashed through his mind. You worked for my parents? He managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleonora nodded, her frail hand adjusting the thin blanket across her lap. For almost 4 years. I was there until you were about 6. Her eyes, though clouded with illness, held a clarity of memory that made James uncomfortable. You were such a serious little boy, always watching everything. Marcus looked between them, confusion evident on his young face. You know each other, Grandma? I knew James when he was very small, Eleonora explained, gesturing toward a chair beside her bed. Sit down, Mr. Wilson. You look like you've seen a ghost. James lowered himself into the chair, his mind racing. This woman, this fragile, dignified woman living in poverty, had once been part of his earliest life, a period he'd spent decades trying to forget. I'm sorry, he said, studying her face for familiar features. I don't remember much from that time. That's probably a blessing, Eleonora replied softly. She turned to Marcus, who stood watching them with undisguised curiosity. Child, would you get Mr. Wilson some water? And take your time putting away that medicine. Understanding the request for privacy, Marcus nodded and retreated to the small kitchen area, though James could feel the boy's eyes still watching them. Your father was a difficult man, Eleonora continued once Marcus was out of earshot. Your mother tried, but she wasn't strong enough to stand up to him. Not then. She paused, taking a labored breath. I'm not telling you this to upset you, just so you understand why I recognized you immediately. Some faces you never forget. James studied the apartment more carefully now, noting the meticulous organization despite the obvious poverty. A collection of worn textbooks sat stacked on a small table. Medical supplies were arranged with precision on a nearby shelf. Despite the peeling paint and water stains on the ceiling, the place radiated care and dignity. How long have you lived here? He asked. 3 years in this apartment. Before that, we moved around. Eleonora's eyes drifted to where Marcus was carefully arranging medicine bottles in the kitchen. We're facing another move soon enough. The rent keeps going up, and my condition doesn't exactly improve my earning potential. James felt a surge of guilt at the comparison between this small, struggling home and his 4,000-square-foot penthouse downtown. Has Marcus always been with you? Since he was 4, she replied, her voice softening. His mother, my daughter, couldn't care for him. Drugs. She said the word matter-of-factly without judgment. She passed 2 years ago. I'm sorry, James said automatically. Eleonora fixed him with a steady gaze. We manage. Marcus is a good boy, smart as they come. He seems to be taking care of your medication very competently, James observed, watching as the boy organized pill bottles with practiced ease. Had to learn young. Diabetes doesn't wait for childhood to end. She shifted slightly, wincing. He should be in school, not playing nurse to an old woman. But the school called social services when he missed too many days. I was in the hospital then, and there was no one else, so he stopped going altogether. James digested this information, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the disparity between his life and theirs. Marcus approached, carefully carrying a glass of water that he handed to James without spilling a drop. Thank you, James said, taking a small sip. You got a fancy car waiting somewhere? Marcus asked bluntly. James shook his head. I walked here. You walked all the way from downtown? The boy seemed impressed despite himself. I needed to clear my head. James admitted. Sometimes buildings and boardrooms can make it hard to think straight. Marcus nodded, as if this made perfect sense. That's why I go to the roof sometimes. You can see the whole city from up there. A sudden coughing fit seized Eleonora, her thin frame shaking with the effort. Marcus immediately moved to her side, supporting her shoulders and offering a cup with a straw. The practiced way he cared for her spoke of months, perhaps years, of such moments. I should go, James said, standing awkwardly. Let you rest. You don't have to leave on my account, Eleonora said once her breathing steadied. But I understand if you need to get back to your world. The phrase struck James like a physical blow. His world, a world of spreadsheets and profit margins, of hollow victories and superficial relationships, a world where success was measured in dollars, not in the kind of quiet dignity he witnessed in this small apartment. Is there anything else you need? He found himself asking. Groceries, other medications. Marcus and Eleonora exchanged a glance, a silent communication passing between them. It was Eleonora who finally spoke. We don't take charity, Mr. Wilson. You've been kind enough with the medicine. James nodded, respecting their pride even as he noted the nearly empty refrigerator visible from where he stood. Of course. I should get going. Thank you for allowing me into your home. Outside in the hallway, James pulled a business card from his wallet and handed it to Marcus, who had followed him to the door. If you need anything at all, call this number. It's my direct line. The boy studied the embossed card with its sleek logo. Why are you being nice to us? Is it because you knew Grandma before? I'm not sure I remember her, James admitted. But maybe I should have. Take care of her, Marcus. She's lucky to have you. I know, the boy replied with simple certainty. The journey back to his penthouse passed in a blur. James barely registered the transition from crumbling buildings to gleaming skyscrapers, from suspicious glances to deferential nods from doormen and valets. In his luxurious apartment, surrounded by expensive furniture he'd never really chosen himself, James felt strangely disconnected, as if he were viewing his life through smudged glass. That night, sleep eluded him. James sat in his home office, bathed in the blue light of his laptop screen, searching for information about Eleonora Jackson. There wasn't much. A few public records, an old teaching assistant certification, a couple of addresses over the years. No social media presence, no digital footprint beyond the basic markers of bureaucratic existence. On impulse, he opened a folder on his desktop labeled Before. Inside were scanned photographs he rarely looked at, pictures from his childhood, most featuring only himself, occasionally with his mother, almost never with his father. He scrolled through the images, searching for a face he might recognize now. There, in the background of a birthday photo, a younger Eleonora, standing near the kitchen door, watching the proceedings with a careful expression, and another, this one showing just her arm and side as she helped a small James, no more than 5, with a jacket. Why had he digitized these images but never really looked at them? A fragment of memory surfaced, crying in a kitchen, a gentle hand on his shoulder, a soft voice saying, "It'll be all right, little man. You're stronger than you know." Had that been Eleonora? The timeline would fit. Dawn found James still awake, making lists and phone calls to bewildered assistants. By 9 a.m., he was back in the neighborhood, this time carrying bags of groceries. He debated having them delivered, but sensed that such an impersonal gesture might be perceived as condescension rather than help. When Marcus opened the door, surprise quickly gave way to wariness. "You came back." "I brought some food," James said simply. "May I come in?" The boy hesitated before stepping aside. Eleonora was sitting up in bed, looking marginally better than the previous day, but still alarmingly frail. "Mr. Wilson," she acknowledged, "this is unexpected." I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation, James admitted, setting the bags on the small kitchen counter. I hope you don't mind. I just brought some, basics. Eleonora's eyes reflected a quiet battle between pride and practicality. Marcus, she said finally, help Mr. Wilson put those things away. As they worked side by side, unpacking groceries and organizing them in near-empty cabinets, James noticed papers scattered on the small kitchen table. Bills, most marked past due or final notice. I can help with those too, he said quietly, nodding toward the bills. Marcus followed his gaze and frowned. Grandma says we don't take handouts. It's not a handout, James replied, choosing his words carefully. Think of it as making things right. What things? The boy's directness was disarming. James paused, a can of soup still in his hand. I'm not sure yet, but I think your grandmother was important to me once, even if I don't remember clearly, and I've been fortunate, very fortunate. From the other room, Eleonora called out, Stop whispering about me in there and bring me some tea, child. The rest of the morning passed in a strange dance of formality and growing familiarity. James learned that Eleonora had been hospitalized 3 times in the past year, that Marcus had essentially been her caregiver since he was 8, and that they had been evicted from their previous apartment when medical bills consumed the rent money. You need a nurse, James stated plainly, after watching Marcus change his grandmother's IV bag with the skill of a medical professional. We need a lot of things, Eleonora replied without self-pity. But nurses cost money, and insurance only covers home visits once a month. I can arrange for someone, James offered. Part-time to start. It would allow Marcus to return to school. The mention of school caused a shadow to pass over the boy's face. They don't want me back, he muttered. The principal said I missed too much. We'll see about that, James said, a hint of his executive authority creeping into his voice. Late that afternoon, after discreetly paying several months of back, rent, and arranging for a home health nurse to start the following day, James returned to his office. The familiar surroundings felt strange now, as if he were returning to a movie set rather than a place he'd spent thousands of hours. His assistant looked up in surprise. Mr. Wilson, we were getting concerned. You've missed 3 meetings and the Hamilton account has been calling hourly. Reschedule everything for next week, James replied, already scrolling through emails on his phone. And find me the contact information for the superintendent of city schools. The superintendent? Claire repeated, confusion evident. May I ask why? James looked up, realizing how unusual his request must sound. I'm exploring educational initiatives for the foundation. The lie came easily, though the Wilson Foundation had been little more than a tax vehicle for years, its charitable activities minimal and carefully targeted for maximum PR value. That night, as James prepared for bed, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Thank you for the food and the nurse, but why are you really helping us? Marcus. James stared at the message, surprised that the boy had a phone, and more surprised at his directness. After a moment's consideration, he typed, Because I can, and maybe because I should have been paying attention a long time ago. As he waited for a response that didn't come, James found himself at his window, looking out over the gleaming city. Somewhere out there, a 10-year-old boy was probably sitting up, watching over his grandmother, carrying burdens no child should bear. And for the first time in years, James felt something crack in the carefully constructed armor around his heart. While preparing his presentation on cost cuts that would primarily affect lower-income employees, James suddenly stopped, remembering what Eleonora had said earlier. You always were a compassionate child, even when your parents weren't. The words, you always were a compassionate child, even when your parents weren't, echoed in James's mind as he stared at the presentation on his laptop screen. The proposed cuts would eliminate health benefits for part-time employees and reduce retirement contributions for everyone below management level. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, suddenly unwilling to continue. James closed the laptop with a decisive click. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They were people like Eleonora and Marcus, people struggling to survive, while corporations like his found increasingly creative ways to transfer wealth from workers to shareholders. His office phone rang, the harsh sound breaking his reverie. "Mr. Wilson, Richard is asking if the presentation will be ready for tomorrow's board meeting." Claire's voice came through the speaker. "Tell him I'm making some adjustments," James replied, his mind already racing with alternative approaches. "Also, Ms. Winters from the school district returned your call. She can meet you tomorrow at 9. "Thank you, Claire. Clear my morning for that." After his assistant disconnected, James reopened his laptop and created a new document. Instead of cuts, he began outlining a profit-sharing program that would actually increase benefits for lower-tier employees while creating incentives for productivity. It wasn't the cost-cutting measure the board wanted, but it was something he could actually stand behind. The next morning, James sat in the waiting area of PS 118, observing the controlled chaos of an urban elementary school. Children rushed through hallways while teachers called for order, their voices blending into the institutional symphony of closing lockers and squeaking sneakers. "Mr. Wilson?" A stern-looking woman with steel-gray hair appeared in the doorway. "I'm Principal Winters. Come in." Her office was small but meticulously organized, with student artwork framed alongside various certificates and diplomas. "I appreciate you making time for me," James began, settling into a chair that seemed designed for someone half his size. "I admit I was curious when the superintendent mentioned that James Wilson wanted to discuss one of our students." She removed her glasses, polishing them with methodical precision. The James Wilson of Wilson Financial isn't typically concerned with public education, at least not at the individual student level. "I'm here about Marcus Jackson." Recognition flickered across her face, followed by wariness. "Marcus hasn't attended school for nearly 6 months. His absences triggered a mandatory report to social services." "I'm aware of his situation," James said carefully. "His grandmother has been seriously ill, and he's been her primary caregiver. But I've arranged for nursing care, and Marcus is ready to return to school." Principal Winters leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Wilson, while I appreciate your interest in this child, Marcus is significantly behind his peers. Our district policy regarding extended absences—" "With all due respect," James interrupted, channeling the same authority he used in boardrooms, "Marcus is exceptionally intelligent. Before I came here, I reviewed the work he completed before his absence. His math skills are particularly remarkable. Being smart doesn't compensate for missing half a year of education. Then perhaps he needs additional support to catch up." James reached into his briefcase and withdrew a check. "I'd like to fund an after-school tutoring program, not just for Marcus, but for any student who needs it." Principal Winters stared at the check, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Wilson, may I ask about your relationship with the Jackson family? It's rather unusual for a financial executive to take such personal interest in a child from this neighborhood." James had anticipated this question, but still felt uncomfortable under her scrutiny. "I knew Eleonora many years ago. She worked for my family when I was a child. I only recently reconnected with her and discovered their situation." She studied him for a long moment before speaking. "I'll need to verify this with Ms. Jackson, you understand?" "Of course. And while your donation is appreciated, it doesn't change district policy. Marcus would need to pass assessment tests to rejoin his class." "He'll be prepared," James assured her, confidence in his voice that he didn't entirely feel. Back at his office, James found his assistant looking uncharacteristically nervous. "The board members have been calling all morning," Claire said, following him into his office. Richard has been particularly insistent about seeing the presentation before the meeting. I've made some significant changes, James replied, setting down his briefcase. They'll see it when I present it. Claire hesitated, then added, Your calendar shows you're supposed to be at the quarterly review with investors right now. James checked his watch, realizing he'd completely forgotten the meeting. Call Richard. Tell him to handle it. James, Claire said, dropping the formal Mr. Wilson she typically used. Is everything all right? You've been different these past few days. Before he could answer, his phone buzzed with a text from the nurse he'd hired for Eleonora. Ms. Jackson's blood sugar dangerously low. Called ambulance, en route to Metro Hospital. Cancel everything, James said, already heading toward the door. Family emergency. Claire's surprised family followed him down the hallway. At the hospital, James found Marcus sitting alone in the waiting room, his small frame somehow appearing even smaller under the harsh fluorescent lights. They won't let me see her, the boy said as James sat beside him. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly. They said I'm not old enough to be back there alone. I'll talk to them, James promised, squeezing Marcus's shoulder gently. After identifying himself as Eleonora's nephew, a lie that came too easily, James was allowed into the treatment area. He found Eleonora connected to various monitors, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow but stable. Mr. Wilson, the attending physician approached, clipboard in hand. I'm Dr. Peters. Are you a relative of Ms. Jackson? Family friend, James amended, aware that his earlier lie might complicate matters. How is she? Stabilized for now, but her condition is serious. Severe hypoglycemia triggered a cardiac event. We'll need to keep her for observation. Run some tests. The doctor paused, glancing at his notes. Our records show this is her 4th hospitalization this year. She needs better care, James stated simply. What she needs is specialized treatment her insurance won't cover. Dr. Peters' voice held the practiced neutrality of someone who had delivered this news too many times. There's a medication regimen that could significantly improve her condition, but it's expensive. And frankly, her heart might eventually require surgical intervention. Cost isn't an issue, James replied immediately. Do whatever needs to be done. The doctor studied him with professional skepticism. Mr. Wilson, I'm obligated to ask, what exactly is your relationship with Ms. Jackson and her grandson? It's somewhat unusual for someone to appear suddenly and assume financial responsibility for a patient's care. The question caught James off guard, though it echoed Principal Winter's earlier concern. As I said, I'm a family friend. I knew Eleonora years ago and recently reconnected with her. And the boy? I'm trying to help him too. Get him back in school. Give him a chance at a normal childhood. Dr. Peters maintained his neutral expression, but something in his eyes had shifted. I see. Well, I should inform you that situations like this, elderly patients with valuable insurance policies, vulnerable children, sometimes attract attention from authorities. They tend to be concerned about potential exploitation. Exploitation? James felt his temper flare. I'm trying to help them, not exploit them. I'm sure you are, the doctor replied, his tone making it clear he wasn't sure at all. But as a mandatory reporter, I'm obligated to note unusual circumstances in my records. James struggled to maintain his composure. Note whatever you need to. Just make sure Eleonora gets the best possible care. Hours later, after ensuring Eleonora was stable and settled into a private room, James sat with Marcus in the hospital cafeteria. The boy picked at a sandwich, his eyes distant. She's going to be okay, James said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. This time, Marcus replied, his voice small but matter-of-fact. She gets worse each time, even if they don't say it. The boy's perceptiveness struck James anew. At 10 years old, Marcus understood mortality in ways most adults avoided contemplating. That's why we're getting her better care, James assured him, and why you need to focus on getting back to school. Your grandmother wants that for you. Marcus looked up, his eyes suddenly sharp. Why are you really helping us? And don't say it's because you knew Grandma when you were little. Lots of people knew us before, and none of them ever helped. The directness of the question deserved an equally direct answer. I'm helping because I can, because I should, and because seeing you and your grandmother reminded me of what really matters. Before Marcus could respond, a woman in a tailored suit approached their table. Mr. Wilson, I'm Denise Harper, hospital social worker. Could I speak with you privately? James felt a knot form in his stomach. Marcus, wait here. I'll be right back. In a small consultation room, Ms. Harper wasted no time on pleasantries. Mr. Wilson, I've been assigned to evaluate Marcus Jackson's situation. I understand you've recently inserted yourself into his life and his grandmother's care. I haven't inserted myself, James replied, bristling at her phrasing. I'm helping a family in need. A family with whom you claim a prior connection, yet there's no record of you in any of their previous hospital visits or school records. She consulted her tablet. In fact, until 3 days ago, there's no evidence you've had any contact with them for decades, if ever. I explained this to Dr. Peters. I knew Eleonora when I was a child. We recently reconnected. Very recently, she emphasized. And now you're paying for expensive medical treatments, hiring private nurses, and involving yourself with a minor child. Surely you can understand why that might raise concerns. James felt his patience evaporating. The only thing that should raise concerns is that a 10-year-old boy's been acting as primary caregiver to his grandmother because our system failed them both. If you spent half as much energy helping families like theirs as you do questioning those who try to help, maybe Marcus wouldn't have had to drop out of school to keep his grandmother alive. Ms. Harper's expression hardened. Mr. Wilson, your wealth and position don't exempt you from scrutiny when it comes to child welfare. In fact, they make your sudden interest in this boy all the more concerning. I'll be conducting a formal investigation into your relationship with the Jacksons. Investigate all you want, James replied, standing to indicate the conversation was over. Just don't interfere with Eleonora's treatment or Marcus's well-being while you do it. As he returned to the cafeteria, James's phone buzzed with a message from his assistant. Urgent. Board calling emergency meeting regarding your leadership. Richard. Gathering votes for temporary removal. Please respond immediately. James stared at the message on his phone, the emergency board meeting notification adding another layer to his already overwhelming day. Slipping the phone back into his pocket, he took a deep breath and returned to Marcus, who was still picking at his sandwich, unaware of the professional storm brewing. Everything okay? The boy asked, his perceptive eyes studying James's face. Just work, James replied, forcing a reassuring smile. Nothing for you to worry about. As they sat in the sterile cafeteria, James's mind raced with conflicting priorities. His carefully constructed professional life was unraveling, precisely because he had finally found something that felt genuinely meaningful. The irony wasn't lost on him. Can I see Grandma again before we leave? Marcus asked, pushing his barely touched sandwich aside. James checked his watch. Let's go up now. Visiting hours end soon. They rode the elevator in companionable silence, Marcus standing closer to James than he had previously, a subtle but noticeable shift in trust. When they reached Eleonora's floor, they found Dr. Peters waiting near the nurse's station. Mr. Wilson, could I speak with you? The doctor's expression was grave. Marcus, why don't you go ahead? Room 412. The nurse will show you. As Marcus walked away with a backward glance, Dr. Peters guided James to a small consultation room, the second such private discussion today, and James braced himself for more questions about his intentions. Ms. Jackson's condition is more serious than we initially thought. Dr. Peters began, his professional demeanor softening slightly. Her heart shows significant damage from years of poorly controlled diabetes. She needs surgery. What kind of surgery? James asked, his earlier defensiveness giving way to genuine concern. Coronary artery bypass. Her insurance will cover the basic procedure, but there's a newer, less invasive approach that would significantly reduce her recovery time and improve her chances. Dr. Peters hesitated. It's experimental enough that her coverage won't touch it. How much? Around $175,000. James didn't hesitate. Schedule it. I'll sign whatever's needed. Dr. Peters studied him with renewed curiosity. That's a substantial amount for someone you describe as a family friend. Does it matter why I'm willing to pay as long as Eleonora gets the care she needs? James countered, fatigue making his tone sharper than intended. I suppose not. The doctor slid a folder across the table. You'll need to complete these financial responsibility forms. And Mr. Wilson, despite our earlier conversation, I do appreciate what you're doing for her. Not many patients in her situation find angels in business suits. The word angel made James uncomfortable. He was no angel, just a man trying to correct course after decades of prioritizing profit over people. He quickly signed the forms, trying not to think about the board meeting he was missing or Ms. Harper's threatened investigation. When he joined Marcus in Eleonora's room, he found the boy holding his grandmother's hand, talking softly about his day as if everything were normal. The scene struck James with its simple intimacy, something his wealth had never been able to purchase. Eleonora's eyes fluttered open when James entered. Despite her weakened state, her gaze remained sharp and assessing. "You're still here?" she murmured, surprise evident in her voice. "I told you I would help," James replied, moving to stand beside her bed. "Did you now?" She smiled faintly. "My memory isn't what it used to be, but I do recall you being a stubborn child. Seems some things don't change." A nurse entered with medication, checking Eleonora's vitals with practiced efficiency. "Visiting hours are ending soon," she informed them kindly. "Ms. Jackson needs her rest before tomorrow's tests." "Tests?" Marcus looked up, alarm crossing his face. James placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "Your grandmother needs some special care for her heart. The doctors are going to figure out exactly what needs to be done." "You mean surgery?" Marcus stated flatly. It wasn't a question. He had clearly been through this routine before. "Yes," Eleonora confirmed, squeezing her grandson's hand. "But this time will be different. This time I'll have the best doctors, thanks to Mr. Wilson here." The nurse glanced at James with renewed interest before continuing her tasks. When she left, Eleonora motioned Marcus closer. "Go home with Mr. Wilson tonight," she instructed. "I need to know you're safe and fed." Marcus started to protest, but the determination in his grandmother's eyes silenced him. James felt a surge of responsibility mingled with uncertainty. He'd committed to helping them financially, but taking temporary custody of Marcus felt like crossing into unfamiliar territory. "I can arrange for a hotel room near the hospital," he offered cautiously. "Nonsense," Eleonora replied firmly. "The boy needs stability, not another strange place. He'll stay with you until I'm better." Outside the hospital, reality crashed back as James checked his phone to find 15 missed calls and a text from his attorney. "Board vote scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow. Need to discuss defense strategy tonight." "Is your place far?" Marcus asked, breaking into James's thoughts as they stood on the sidewalk in the cool evening air. "Downtown, about 20 minutes by car." James hesitated, then made a decision. "Let's get some of your things first. You'll be more comfortable with your own clothes and whatever else you need." The taxi ride to Marcus's neighborhood was quiet, the boy staring out the window with the weariness of someone much older. At the apartment, James waited in the living room while Marcus packed a small backpack with seemingly practiced efficiency, a child who had learned to be ready to move at a moment's notice. I should get some of Grandma's things, too, Marcus said, gathering a nightgown and toiletries. The hospital stuff makes her skin itch. As they prepared to leave, James noticed a stack of mail on the small table by the door. Bills, mostly. Many marked with final notices and disconnection warnings. Even with the rent paid, the Jacksons' financial situation remained precarious. He discreetly gathered the envelopes, tucking them into his jacket. The ride to James's penthouse was marked by Marcus's widening eyes as they entered the upscale neighborhood. The doorman's respectful nod, the private elevator, the expansive entry hall, each element of luxury seemed to make the boy shrink further into himself. "You live here alone?" Marcus asked, standing hesitantly in the vast living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "Yes," James answered, suddenly seeing his home through the boy's eyes, beautiful but cold, perfect but impersonal. "It's bigger than our whole building," Marcus observed, still not moving from his spot near the door, his small backpack clutched tightly. "Let me show you where you'll sleep," James offered, leading him down the hallway to a guest room that had never actually hosted a guest. "The bathroom is through there. Make yourself at home while I order us some dinner." Left alone in his kitchen, James called his attorney. The conversation was brief and discouraging. Richard had indeed marshaled enough board votes to force a temporary removal, citing James's erratic behavior and failure to fulfill fiduciary responsibilities. "They can't just fire me," James argued. "I founded the company." "They're not firing you, yet," his attorney explained patiently. "They're voting for a temporary leadership change while they evaluate your recent actions. If you attended the meeting tomorrow with a solid explanation and recommitment to the firm's objectives, you might salvage the situation. And if I don't? Then Richard's temporary position likely becomes permanent." After hanging up, James stood in his kitchen, weighing options that had seemed unthinkable just days ago. His company, the achievement he'd spent 2 decades building, now hung in the balance because he had chosen to help one family in need. The rational move would be to attend the meeting, smooth things over, and find a way to help the Jacksons without jeopardizing his position. But something had fundamentally shifted in James. The board's reaction only confirmed what he'd begun to suspect. The system he'd thrived in was designed to maintain wealth and power, not to address real human suffering. His phone rang again. Ms. Harper, the social worker. "Mr. Wilson, I've scheduled a formal interview regarding your relationship with Marcus Jackson for tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the Department of Child Services." "I can't make it tomorrow," James replied, keeping his voice low to prevent Marcus from overhearing. "Eleanor is having surgery, and I need to be there for Marcus." "Your unavailability will be noted in my report," she stated coldly, "as will your decision to take the minor child to your residence without proper authorization." "His grandmother specifically requested it," James countered, frustration mounting. "Ms. Jackson is not in a position to make sound decisions about her grandson's welfare. Until my investigation is complete, any continued unsupervised contact with the child could result in more serious intervention." After another tense exchange, James ended the call, feeling cornered from all sides. Tomorrow, he would either lose his company or risk having Marcus taken away, or possibly both. He found the boy in the guest room, sitting on the edge of the bed, still wearing his jacket and shoes, as if prepared to leave at any moment. "I ordered pizza," James announced, trying to sound casual. "I hope that's okay." Marcus nodded silently, his eyes moving to the phone in James's hand. "Was that about Grandma?" "No, just some work things." The lie felt necessary but uncomfortable. "Are you doing okay? I know this is all a lot." "I'm fine," the boy replied automatically, the practiced response of a child accustomed to minimizing his own needs. "Will they really fix Grandma's heart tomorrow?" James sat beside him on the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. "Not tomorrow. Tomorrow is, just more tests." The surgery will probably be in a few days once they're sure it's safe. The other times, they just gave her medicine and sent her home when the insurance ran out, Marcus said, a question implicit in his statement. That won't happen this time, James assured him, surprised by the certainty in his own voice. I promise. That night, after Marcus had finally fallen asleep, James sat in his home office surrounded by financial documents, his personal accounts, investment portfolios, property deeds, calculating exactly how much he could liquidate quickly if needed. On his laptop screen, the board presentation he'd never deliver still displayed its first slide. Reimagining corporate responsibility. In the silence of his usually empty home, James received a message from Dr. Peters. Eleonora is being moved to surgery prep tomorrow at 8 a.m. Tests showed critical blockage requiring immediate intervention. When the doctor chef revealed that Eleonora needed a surgery cardiaca cara E not covered by insurance, James committed immediately to pay, but the medico questioned his relationship with the family, insinuating that there might be something suspicious about his interest in them. James barely slept that night, his mind racing between concern for Eleonora's emergency surgery, Marcus's uncertain future, and his own professional crisis. The message from Dr. Peters had upended their timeline completely. The surgery wasn't days away. It was happening this morning. At 5:30 a.m., he gently knocked on the guest room door. Marcus, we need to get up. The hospital called. The boy was already awake, sitting fully dressed on the edge of the bed. Is Grandma okay? They're going to do the surgery today, James explained, choosing his words carefully. The test showed they shouldn't wait any longer. Marcus nodded, his face a mask of practiced stoicism that broke James's heart. No child should be this accustomed to medical emergencies. Can I see her before? That's why we're going early. Let's get some breakfast on the way. As they rode to the hospital, James's phone buzzed constantly. Messages from board members, his attorney, even Richard himself, all reminding him of the 9 a.m. meeting that would determine his professional fate. He silenced the device, focusing instead on the quiet boy beside him. At the hospital, they found Eleonora already being prepped for surgery, her thin frame nearly disappearing among the monitoring equipment and IV lines. Despite her weakened state, her eyes brightened when Marcus entered. There's my brave boy, she whispered, extending a fragile hand. Marcus took it, his composure finally cracking slightly. You didn't say the surgery was today. I only just found out myself, Eleonora replied, her gaze shifting to James with silent gratitude. But I'm in good hands now. Dr. Peters entered, nodding respectfully to James before addressing Eleonora. We're ready to take you down, Ms. Jackson. The procedure will take 4 to 6 hours. While Eleonora was wheeled away, a nurse directed them to the surgical waiting area. James checked his watch, 7:45 a.m. The board meeting would begin in just over an hour, his career hanging in the balance, while he sat in this sterile room, watching Marcus struggle to maintain his composure. I need to make a quick call, James said gently. Will you be okay for a few minutes? In the corridor, James phoned his attorney. I can't make the meeting. Eleonora is in emergency surgery. James, you need to understand the severity of this situation, his attorney replied, exasperation evident. Richard has the votes. If you're not there to defend yourself, your removal is guaranteed. Then it's guaranteed, James replied with sudden clarity. Some things are more important. Returning to the waiting room, James found Marcus studying a medical pamphlet about heart surgery with intense concentration. The boy looked up, his eyes reflecting a wisdom far beyond his years. You're missing something important at work, aren't you? James sat down beside him. Yes, but I'm exactly where I need to be right now. Because of what Grandma did for you when you were little? Marcus asked, his question piercing directly to the heart of what James himself had been wondering. Maybe, James admitted. I still don't remember much about that time, to be honest. Marcus was quiet for a moment, Grandma doesn't talk about your family much, just sometimes when she's really tired or when her medicine makes her confused. She says your dad was a bad man." The statement hung in the air between them, a door cracking open to memories James had spent a lifetime burying. Before he could respond, a nurse approached with a clipboard. "Mr. Wilson, there are some additional consent forms for Ms. Jackson's procedure." She lowered her voice. "And Ms. Harper from Social Services is asking to speak with you at the reception desk." James squeezed Marcus's shoulder. "I'll be right back. Don't worry." At the reception desk, Ms. Harper waited with a cold efficiency that seemed out of place amid the human drama of the hospital. "Mr. Wilson, I understand Ms. Jackson is in surgery. I need to discuss placement arrangements for Marcus during her recovery." "He's staying with me," James responded automatically. "That's not possible without proper vetting and temporary guardianship paperwork," she countered. "I've arranged for emergency foster placement until—" "Absolutely not," James interrupted. "Eleonora specifically asked me to care for him." Ms. Jackson's wishes, while noted, are not the determining factor in child placement decisions. Ms. Harper's voice remained clinically detached. "My investigation into your sudden involvement with this family has raised significant concerns." James felt his professional negotiation skills evaporating in the face of this bureaucratic wall. "What concerns? That I'm helping them? That I'm paying for medical care their insurance wouldn't cover? That a wealthy single man with no prior childcare experience has developed an intense interest in a vulnerable child, removing him from his home and traditional support systems?" Her gaze was unflinching. "Surely you understand how this appears." "How it appears?" James struggled to keep his voice down. "What about how it is? Marcus has been caring for his dying grandmother because our social safety net failed them both. Where was your concern when a 10-year-old was administering medication and missing school to be a caregiver?" Ms. Harper remained unmoved. "We became involved when the school reported his absences, as required by law, and now we're doing our job by ensuring his welfare during his grandmother's illness." Their standoff was interrupted by Dr. Peters, still in his surgical cap, approaching with quick strides. "Mr. Wilson, could I speak with you privately? It's about Ms. Jackson." Ms. Harper interjected. "I should be included in any discussions regarding the family." The doctor assessed her briefly. "This is a medical matter for the financial guarantor of the procedure. Please excuse us." In a small consultation room, Dr. Peters didn't waste time. "The damage to Ms. Jackson's heart is more extensive than we anticipated. We're proceeding with the bypass, but her recovery will be longer and more complicated than we initially discussed." "Do whatever is necessary," James replied. "Cost isn't an issue." "It's not just about cost," the doctor continued. "She'll need specialized care for months, possibly in a rehabilitation facility, and there's something else you should know." He hesitated. "During our pre-surgery interview, she was quite adamant about discussing her relationship to you." James felt a tightening in his chest. "What did she say?" "She said she was fired from your parents' household for interfering in what she called a harmful situation. She seemed very concerned that you should know this before her surgery, in case—" The doctor didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. "In case she doesn't survive," James completed the thought, a cold dread settling over him. "The procedure carries significant risks in her condition," Dr. Peters confirmed. "She also mentioned something about protecting you from your father. She was quite emotional about it." James thanked the doctor mechanically, his mind reeling with fragments of childhood memories suddenly struggling to surface. Raised voices slamming doors, hiding in closets, and a gentle voice saying, "It's not your fault, little James." When he returned to the waiting room, he found Ms. Harper sitting beside Marcus, speaking in hushed tones. The boy looked up at James with alarm in his eyes. "She says I have to go with her," Marcus stated flatly, "that I can't stay with you anymore." James crouched down to meet Marcus at eye level. "That's not going to happen. I promised your grandmother I would take care of you, and I keep my promises." "Mr. Wilson," Ms. Harper began sharply. "No," James cut her off. "Marcus stays with me while his grandmother recovers. If you want to fight about it, my attorneys will be happy to oblige, but right now, this boy needs stability, not another trauma." The standoff might have continued if not for James's phone ringing, his attorney again. He answered it with irritation. "I told you I'm not leaving the hospital." "It's done, James," came the somber reply. "The board voted unanimously for your temporary removal. Richard is already meeting with the key clients. I'm sorry." The news should have devastated him, but James felt only a strange sense of liberation. Tell them they can have the company. Some things matter more. After ending the call, James noticed both Marcus and Ms. Harper watching him with different forms of curiosity. "Was that about your work?" Marcus asked. "Yes, it seems I've just been fired," James answered with surprising lightness. "Or temporarily removed, which is corporate. Speak for the same thing." Ms. Harper's expression shifted slightly. "Because you're here instead of at a meeting?" "Because I started caring about people instead of profit margins." James turned to Marcus. "How about we get some lunch while we wait? The surgery will take several more hours." In the hospital cafeteria, Marcus picked at a sandwich, while James mentally calculated his next moves. His professional life lay in ruins. Eleonora fought for her life in surgery, and a determined social worker threatened to separate him from Marcus. Yet somehow, he felt more purposeful than he had in years. "They're going to take me away, aren't they?" Marcus asked suddenly, his voice small but resigned. "No," James promised. "I won't let that happen." "But that lady said—" "Sometimes adults get caught up in rules and forget to see what's actually best for the person they're supposed to be helping," James explained. "Ms. Harper is doing her job, but she doesn't know the whole story." "What whole story?" Marcus asked, his perceptive eyes studying James's face. Before James could formulate an answer, his phone buzzed with a text from the nurse. Eleonora was out of surgery and being moved to recovery. They could see her briefly in an hour. When they finally entered Eleonora's room in the intensive care unit, the sight of her, pale, intubated, connected to numerous machines, made Marcus freeze in the doorway. James gently guided him forward, explaining the purpose of each tube and monitor in simple terms to demystify the frightening scene. Though sedated, Eleonora seemed to sense their presence. Her eyelids fluttered, and her hand moved slightly toward Marcus. The boy took it carefully, mindful of the IV line. "She's trying to wake up," he whispered. "That's a good sign," James assured him, though Dr. Peters had warned it might be hours before she regained consciousness. To their surprise, Eleonora's eyes opened partially, unfocused at first, then settling on James. She tried to speak, but the breathing tube prevented it. Instead, she squeezed Marcus's hand and looked meaningfully at James, a silent communication passing between them. A nurse approached, checking monitors. "She's doing remarkably well but needs rest now. You can come back this evening." As they left the ICU, Ms. Harper was waiting. "I've made arrangements for Marcus to stay at the Children's Center until a foster placement opens tomorrow." "That won't be necessary," James stated firmly. "I'm taking him home with me." "Mr. Wilson, without temporary guardianship papers—" "File for emergency guardianship," James interrupted. "I'll sign whatever is needed, but I promised Eleonora, and I'm keeping that promise." Back at his apartment that evening, with Marcus finally asleep after their emotionally exhausting day, James sat in his darkened living room staring at his phone, specifically at an email notification that his company access had been revoked. 20 years of his life dismissed with a single system update. Inexplicably drawn to the past, he opened his laptop and searched for Eleanor Jackson, Detroit, 1980s. Several newspaper archives appeared, and one headline caught his eye. Local teacher's aide reports suspected abuse, loses job. The grainy image showed a much younger Eleonora outside a courthouse. As he read the article, dated 1985, James felt the blood drain from his face. Eleonora had reported James's father for child abuse, testifying she had witnessed concerning injuries and behavior. The case was eventually dismissed due to insufficient evidence, and Eleonora was fired for creating a hostile work environment. The article noted she had previously worked for the Wilson family for 4 years. James stared at the screen, forgotten memories suddenly crystallizing with painful clarity. His father's rage, his mother's silence, and Eleonora, the only adult who had tried to protect him. Late that night, when his phone buzzed with a message, James expected more. Corporate fallout. Instead, it was from Dr. Peters. "Eleonora is awake and asking for you. She says there's something crucial you need to know." James immediately jumped up from his desk, the newspaper article still displayed on his screen. Despite the late hour, he called for a car service, his mind racing with the implications of Eleonora's message. What crucial information did she need to share? Something about his father? About the abuse she had tried to report years ago? While waiting for the car, he checked on Marcus, who was sleeping soundly, his small form barely making a dent in the king-sized guest bed. James wrote a quick note explaining where he'd gone, leaving it on the nightstand in case the boy woke up. He arranged for his building's security to keep watch on the apartment and slipped out into the night. The hospital corridors were eerily quiet at this hour, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows as James made his way to the ICU. Dr. Peters met him outside Eleonora's room, his expression guarded. "She insisted on speaking with you, despite my recommendation to rest," the doctor explained. "Her condition is stable but fragile. Please keep it brief." Inside, Eleonora lay propped up slightly, the breathing tube removed but oxygen still flowing through a nasal cannula. Her eyes were sunken and shadowed, but alert as they fixed on James. "You came," she whispered, her voice raspy from intubation. "Of course I did," James replied, taking the chair beside her bed. "I saw the article, Eleonora. About what happened. About what you tried to do for me." A faint smile crossed her lips. "So you finally know. I wondered if you'd ever find out." She gestured weakly for water, which James helped her sip through a straw. "I didn't remember," he admitted. "I think I blocked a lot of that time out." "Children do that to survive," she said. "Your father was a monster, James. What he did to you, I couldn't stand by and watch. But the system..." She shook her head, slightly. "Well, money talks. Your father had plenty of it and friends in high places." "You lost your job because of me," James said, guilt washing over him. "Because of him," she corrected firmly. "Never think it was your fault. None of it was." A nurse entered to check Eleonora's vitals, giving James a pointed look that indicated he shouldn't stay much longer. When they were alone again, Eleonora grasped his hand with surprising strength. "There's something you need to know," she said urgently. "After I was fired, I didn't just walk away. I contacted someone, a man who ran a mentoring program for at-risk boys. I told him about you, about what was happening. His name was Thompson." James felt the room tilt slightly. "Robert Thompson, my mentor? You sent him to me?" Eleonora nodded. "He promised to watch out for you from a distance. When I read years later about you getting that scholarship, moving out of your father's house at 16, I knew he'd kept his word." The revelation struck James like a physical blow. Robert Thompson, the man who had guided him through his teenage years, offered him a job at his small investment firm, encouraged him to pursue finance and eventually start his own company. None of that had been coincidence. It had been Eleonora's doing. "He never told me," James whispered, memories reshuffling themselves in his mind. "He promised me he wouldn't," Eleonora replied. "Said you needed to believe someone had recognized your potential on merit alone, not out of pity. Their conversation was cut short by the nurse returning more insistently. "Ms. Jackson needs rest now, sir." James squeezed Eleanor's hand. "I'll be back tomorrow. Marcus is safe, I promise." "Take care of that boy," she whispered as he stood to leave. "He deserves better than what this world has given him." Driving back to his apartment, James felt as though the foundations of his life had shifted. Everything he had achieved, his education, his career, his wealth, had sprung from the intervention of a woman who had sacrificed her livelihood to protect him and a mentor who had guided him from the shadows. Lost in thought, he didn't notice the car following his until it was too late. As he rounded the corner to his building, 3 men stepped out from the shadows of an alley. James recognized the leader immediately, Dion, the man who had confronted him in Marcus's neighborhood. "Well, look who it is," Dion said, blocking James's path to his building's entrance. "The rich guy playing savior." "I don't want trouble," James said, keeping his voice steady while assessing his options. The street was deserted at this hour, the doorman inside likely unable to see them from his station. "Should have thought of that before you started poking around our territory," one of the other men said, moving to flank James. "People talking about a rich man asking questions, paying for the old lady's surgery." "This isn't about territory," James replied, backing up slightly. "This is about helping a sick woman and her grandson." Dion stepped closer, his face hardening. "This is about you bringing attention we don't need. Cops been around more since you showed up. Social workers, hospital people asking questions." "That has nothing to do with me," James protested. But even as he spoke, he knew it wasn't entirely true. His involvement had indeed brought scrutiny to a community that operated partly in the shadows. The first blow caught him by surprise, a punch to the stomach that doubled him over. The second hit his jaw, sending him sprawling onto the sidewalk. As the men surrounded him, James tried to protect his head, the taste of blood filling his mouth. Through the pain and confusion, he heard a young voice shouting, "Stop! Leave him alone!" Marcus. The boy must have woken up, seen the note, and followed him somehow. James tried to call out, to warn him to stay back, but another kick to his ribs stole his breath. "Kid, get out of here," Dion shouted. "This ain't your business." "He's helping my grandma," Marcus yelled, his small figure darting between the attackers. "He's the only one who cared enough to help us." Something in the boy's desperate defense caused the men to hesitate. James seized the moment to struggle to his knees, reaching for Marcus. "Go inside," he gasped. "Now!" Instead, Marcus placed himself between James and the attackers, his thin arms outstretched. "If you hurt him again, I'll tell Detective Rodriguez, who sells at the corner by my school," he threatened, his voice trembling but determined. The standoff might have escalated further if not for the building's security light suddenly flooding the area. The doorman had finally noticed the commotion and was calling for assistance on his radio. Dion and his companions backed away. "This isn't over," Dion warned, pointing at James. "Stay out of our neighborhood." As they retreated into the shadows, James pulled Marcus close, checking him for injuries. "Are you okay? How did you even get down here?" "I took the elevator," Marcus replied simply. "I heard noises outside and saw them hitting you." With Marcus's help, James managed to stagger into the building, the doorman rushing to assist them. "Sir, should I call the police? An ambulance?" "No police," James said firmly, though every breath sent pain shooting through his ribs. "But maybe a doctor." Upstairs in his apartment, a private physician summoned discreetly by the building manager examined James's injuries while Marcus watched anxiously from the doorway. 2 fractured ribs, multiple contusions, and a mild concussion, the doctor concluded, preparing a syringe of pain medication. "You should really go to a hospital for observation." "Not possible," James replied, wincing as the needle entered his arm. "I need to be here for Marcus." After the doctor left, With instructions for care and a promise to return the next day, Marcus approached James's bed hesitantly. "Is this my fault? Did those men hurt you because you're helping us?" James reached out, despite the pain, to squeeze the boy's shoulder. "None of this is your fault. Never think that." "But they said they're afraid of change," James explained, the pain medication beginning to dull his senses. "Sometimes when people try to help, it disrupts systems that others depend on, even if those systems are harmful." Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, his expression troubled. "Grandma used to say that too. That's why she lost her job at your house, because she tried to help you." "She was very brave," James murmured, fighting to stay alert. "Just like you were tonight." As the medication pulled him toward unconsciousness, James felt Marcus carefully arranging the blanket over him, a child used to caring for others, even now. When James awoke the next morning, his body throbbing with pain, he found a glass of water and his pain pills carefully arranged on the nightstand. Marcus sat in a chair across the room, watching him with solemn eyes. "Thank you," James said, gesturing to the water. "You didn't have to do that." "It's what I do for Grandma," Marcus replied with a shrug. "How bad does it hurt?" "I've had worse," James lied, struggling to sit up without gasping in pain. The ringing of his phone interrupted them. The hospital's number flashed on the screen, sending a jolt of alarm through James. Had Eleonora taken a turn for the worse? "Mr. Wilson," Dr. Peters' voice came through clearly. "I'm calling about Ms. Jackson. She's developed a post-operative infection. We're treating it aggressively, but with her weakened condition—" "I understand," James said, his eyes meeting Marcus's worried gaze. "We'll be there right away." Before they could leave, however, another call came through, this one from James's attorney. "James, I've been trying to reach you all morning. The board has voted to terminate your position permanently. Richard has been named CEO. They're freezing your corporate accounts, pending an audit of your recent expenditures. The professional catastrophe barely registered compared to Eleonora's condition. They can audit whatever they want. I'm on my way to the hospital." "There's more," his attorney continued gravely. "I've received a call from Child Protective Services. Ms. Harper has filed a report recommending immediate removal of Marcus Jackson from your care. They're sending someone to your residence this morning." James ended the call and turned to Marcus, who clearly had overheard enough to understand the situation. "Are they going to take me away?" the boy asked, fear evident in his voice. Before James could answer, his phone buzzed with a new message, an official letter from a law firm representing his former mentor, Robert Thompson. The subject line read, "Regarding the sealed letter entrusted to our firm in the event of Mr. Thompson's death." In the hospital, James discovered that his own mentor, the man who had tirú him from the streets decades ago, had fallecido recently, leaving a carta directed to him that was never delivered. The letter reveals that his mentor had faced the same corporate dilemma years before, choosing profit over his convictions. A decision that had atormento him for the rest of his life. Simultaneously, James is informed that the board voted unanimously for his démission, and the social worker recommended that Marcus be placed in a temporary home while Eleonora recovers. James stared at the message notification, the news of his mentor's death and the long-withheld letter momentarily stunning him into stillness. Robert Thompson, dead. The man who had shaped his life, guided him from the streets to success, had been gone for months, and James hadn't known. This revelation, coupled with his corporate downfall and the threat to Marcus, created a perfect storm of crisis. "James?" Marcus's voice pulled him back to their immediate reality. "What's happening?" Pocketing his phone, James made a decision. "We're going to visit your grandmother first. Then we'll figure everything else out." Pain shot through his ribs as he stood, the injuries from last night's beating making every movement an exercise in endurance. Marcus watched him with worried eyes, instinctively offering his shoulder for support, a child accustomed to being the caregiver. "I'm okay," James assured him, though they both knew it was a lie. The journey to the hospital was tense with unspoken fears. In the back of the taxi, Marcus sat unnaturally still, his small hands clutching the backpack containing his few possessions. James recognized the posture, a child preparing for another disruption, another system failing him. "No matter what happens," James said quietly, "I'm not going to abandon you or your grandmother." Marcus nodded but remained silent, a decade of experience having taught him the fragility of adult promises. At the hospital, they found Eleonora noticeably weaker than the previous night, her skin feverish and ashen. Despite her condition, her eyes remained alert, immediately registering James's injuries. "What happened to you?" she whispered. "Just a misunderstanding," James replied, guiding Marcus closer to her bedside. "Dr. Peters told us about the infection. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been run over twice." Eleanor managed a faint smile. "But I'm still here." While Marcus carefully held his grandmother's hand, updating her on small details from their day, James stepped into the hallway to read the message about Thompson's letter. The law firm had attached a scanned copy, explaining that, per Thompson's instructions, it should have been delivered to James months ago when Thompson died of heart failure. The letter itself was handwritten, the familiar slanting script immediately transporting James back to his teenage years. "James, if you're reading this, I've finally run out of time. There's something I should have told you years ago, but pride and shame kept me silent. Before I discovered you, before I became anyone's mentor, I faced the same crossroads you may someday encounter. I chose wrong. I was once like you, successful, respected, powerful in financial circles. Then I discovered that my firm was quietly destroying the same communities I'd come from. When faced with the choice between profit and people, I chose profit. I told myself it was just business, that I could do more good from a position of power than by sacrificing my career. I was wrong. That decision hollowed me out. The wealth I accumulated couldn't fill the void where my integrity had been. By the time I recognized my mistake, the damage was done, to communities, to families, and to my soul. When Eleonora Jackson contacted me about you, I saw a chance for redemption. You were my second chance, James. Through you, I hope to nurture the courage I had lacked. Whatever crossroads you're facing as you read this, remember that wealth without purpose is poverty of the worst kind. True wealth lies in what you build, who you help, the difference you make. Don't repeat my mistake. Robert. James lowered the letter, his vision blurring. All these years he'd believed Thompson had randomly discovered him through a community program. Instead, Eleonora had engineered his rescue, and Thompson had been seeking atonement for his own moral failure. His phone buzzed with an urgent message from his building's security. Representatives from Child Protective Services had arrived at his apartment and were demanding to see Marcus. Looking back through the doorway at Marcus sitting beside Eleonora, James made his decision. He would not repeat Thompson's mistake. Rejoining them, he gently interrupted. "Marcus, we need to leave for a little while. There's something important we need to do." The boy looked between James and his grandmother, confusion evident. Eleonora, however, seemed to understand immediately. "Go with him, child," she said softly. "I need to rest anyway, and—" "James?" Her eyes met his with surprising intensity. "Do what's right, not what's easy." Outside the hospital, James knelt despite the pain in his ribs to look Marcus in the eye. "People are coming to take you to a temporary home while your grandmother recovers." Fear flashed across the boy's face. "The lady from yesterday? Ms. Harper?" "Yes, but I'm not going to let that happen." James spoke with quiet determination. "I need you to trust me right now. Can you do that?" Marcus studied him for a long moment, his young face serious beyond his years. Finally, he nodded. Instead of heading back to his apartment, James directed the taxi to a different part of the city. During the ride, he made several calls to his personal attorney, not the corporate one, to his private banker, and finally to the hospital, arranging for Eleonora's continued care regardless of his physical presence. "Where are we going?" Marcus finally asked as they traveled deeper into the city. "Somewhere safe while I figure things out," James replied, his mind racing through options and contingencies. The taxi dropped them at a modest hotel where James checked in under his middle name, Wilson. In their room, he immediately laid out the situation for Marcus as clearly as he could, respecting the boy's intelligence and right to understand what was happening. "Ms. Harper and people like her think I'm not the right person to take care of you," he explained. "They want to put you in a foster home until your grandmother recovers." "But I don't want to go to another foster home," Marcus said quietly. "Last time Grandma was in the hospital, they put me with people who just wanted the money. They didn't even make sure I got to visit her." "That's why we're here instead of at my apartment," James said. "I need time to work things out legally, to make sure you can stay with your grandmother." Pain medication and exhaustion eventually caught up with James. Despite his intention to remain vigilant, he drifted into uneasy sleep. When he awoke hours later, momentary panic gripped him at the sight of the empty second bed. Had Marcus run away? Relief washed over him when he spotted the boy sitting by the window, watching the street below. "I thought you might have left," James said, wincing as he sat up. "Where would I go?" Marcus asked pragmatically. His expression changed, becoming hesitant. "I'm hungry." Of course he was hungry. They hadn't eaten since morning. James ordered room service, and as they waited, he began researching on his phone, looking for precedents in guardianship cases, ways to expedite the process. By morning, James had formulated a plan. First, however, they needed to check on Eleonora. Using cash and keeping a low profile, they made their way back to the hospital, where they found her condition slightly improved but still serious. "They came looking for you," she told Marcus weakly. "A woman and a police officer. Said you were missing." James felt a twinge of guilt. His impulsive decision to avoid CPS had technically made Marcus a missing child, potentially making their situation worse. "I'm going to fix this," he promised Eleonora. "The right way." Leaving the hospital, James spotted a police car in the parking lot and instinctively pulled Marcus into a side corridor. "We need to be careful," he whispered. Marcus nodded, but his expression had changed. "I know somewhere we can go," he said suddenly. "Somewhere they won't look." The boy directed them through a series of bus rides to the outskirts of his old neighborhood, eventually leading James to an abandoned apartment building cordoned off with condemned notices. "This was our building before," Marcus explained, finding a gap in the chain-link fence surrounding the property. "Before Grandma got really sick and we had to move. I used to come back here sometimes when I needed to think." Following the agile boy through the fence and a partially boarded entrance, James found himself in a derelict structure that nonetheless retained whispers of the homes it once contained. Marcus led him up several flights of stairs, moving with the confidence of familiarity. On the fourth floor, the boy pushed open a door to reveal a small apartment, surprisingly less damaged than the rest of the building. A makeshift bed of blankets in one corner suggested Marcus had indeed used this as a retreat. "No one comes here," Marcus said simply. "The other kids think it's haunted." James looked around the space, understanding dawning. "This is where you came when things got bad?" Marcus nodded, sitting on his blanket nest. "When Grandma first got sick, before I learned how to take care of her medicine. Sometimes I'd get scared and run away. I'd come here until I felt brave again." The revelation of this child's private sanctuary, this place of retreat when the world became too much, struck James deeply. Here was tangible evidence of the burdens Marcus had carried, the fear he had faced alone. "Marcus," James said, carefully lowering himself to sit beside the boy. "I need to tell you my story now. The real story." For the next hour, as dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight penetrating the boarded windows, James shared his truth. Growing up with an abusive father and a mother too afraid to intervene, how Eleonora had tried to protect him, how Thompson had guided him off the streets, and how he had built wealth while losing sight of what mattered. "Your grandmother saved my life twice," James concluded. "First, when she reported my father, even though it cost her job, and again when she sent Thompson to mentor me. I didn't know any of this until now." Marcus listened with the deep attention characteristic of children who have been forced to understand adult concerns too early. When James finished, the boy asked simply, "Is that why you're helping us, because you owe Grandma?" "At first, maybe that was part of it," James admitted. "But now it's because I care what happens to you both. Because helping you feels right in a way nothing has in years." As the afternoon light began to fade, James realized they needed to make a decision. They couldn't hide forever. "Marcus, we have two choices," he said carefully. "We can keep hiding, which might get more difficult and make things worse eventually. Or we can go back, face Miss Harper and the authorities, and I can fight for the right to be your guardian legally." "What's better for Grandma?" Marcus asked immediately. The question, so characteristic of the boy's selflessness, cemented James's resolve. "The legal way. It will be harder at first, but better in the end." "Then that's what we do," Marcus stated with simple certainty. Instead of forcing Marcus to return that night, however, James decided they would spend one last evening planning their approach. As darkness fell, they sat together in the abandoned apartment, sharing a meal of convenience store sandwiches. Two souls from different worlds united by unexpected circumstances. "I was scared when those men hurt you," Marcus admitted suddenly. "I thought you might decide helping us wasn't worth it." "Some things are worth any cost," James replied, thinking of Thompson's letter and the regret it contained. He looked at Marcus in the dimming light and added, "Besides, I think you might be helping me more than I'm helping you." Dawn broke over the city, golden light filtering through the cracks in the boarded windows of the abandoned apartment. James awoke stiff and sore, his injuries from the beating more painful after a night spent on the hard floor. Beside him, Marcus was already awake, meticulously folding the thin blankets they had used. "I've been thinking about what we should do," Marcus said, his young face serious. "We need a plan that will make the social worker lady listen." James nodded, wincing as he sat up. "You're right, and I think I know how to make them listen." He pulled out his phone, checking the battery. Still, enough for what he needed to do. Sometimes, to fix a broken system, you have to make noise that everyone can hear. After a simple breakfast of vending machine granola bars, they made their way carefully through the city, avoiding main streets and keeping their heads down. James's mind was racing, formulating a strategy that would leverage the one advantage he still had: his public profile. "Where are we going?" Marcus asked as they boarded a bus heading downtown. "To my company, my former company," James replied. "There's something I need to do there." An hour later, they stood across the street from the gleaming glass tower of Wilson Financial Solutions. Employees streamed through the revolving doors, none noticing the disheveled man in rumpled clothes, watching from a distance, a young boy at his side. "That whole building is yours?" Marcus asked, eyes wide. "It was," James corrected. "And that's part of the problem. I spent 20 years building a company that made rich people richer, while families like yours struggled to survive." He checked his watch. "It's almost time. There's someone I need to call first." James dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Alicia, it's James Wilson. I need that favor you've been offering since you left the Tribune. Yes, now. 1 hour. The steps of Wilson Financial. Bring cameras." After ending the call, he looked down at Marcus. "Ready to help me make some noise?" The boy nodded solemnly. though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "I won't let you down," James promised. "But what we're about to do might seem a little scary. Sometimes you have to stand up publicly for what's right." While they waited, James made more calls, tapping into a network of contacts he'd built over decades. Former employees who'd left the company when it became too cutthroat. Clients who'd expressed ethical concerns about investment strategies. Community organizers from neighborhoods like Marcus's who had sought corporate partnerships only to be rebuffed. "What if nobody comes?" Marcus asked, watching James work the phone with increasing urgency. "Someone will," James assured him, though doubt nagged at him too. "People want to believe in something better. They just need a clear voice to follow." 45 minutes later, their first allies arrived. A small group of administrative staff who had worked under James for years, led by Claire, his former assistant. "The board meeting just started," Claire informed him, her usually perfect appearance slightly frazzled. "Richard's announcing the new austerity measures. Half the support staff is being cut." James nodded grimly. "Exactly as I predicted." He looked at the small group gathered around him. "Thank you for coming. What I'm asking might put your jobs at risk." "They're already at risk," one woman replied dryly. "Might as well go down fighting for something worthwhile." More supporters arrived, community activists, former clients, even a few shareholders who had questioned the company's recent direction. By the time Alicia arrived with her camera crew, a sizable crowd had gathered on the sidewalk across from Wilson Financial. "You sure about this, James?" Alicia asked, eyeing his bruised face and rumpled appearance. "This isn't exactly the polished CEO the public is used to seeing." "I'm counting on that," James replied, straightening his shoulders despite the pain in his ribs. "Sometimes the truth is messy." As cameras began to set up, James knelt beside Marcus. "You don't have to do this if you don't want to. You can wait with Claire." The boy shook his head firmly. "I want to help. Grandma always says if something's wrong, you gotta speak up." With Marcus at his side, James led the growing crowd across the street to the wide stone steps of Wilson Financial Solutions. Security guards emerged from the lobby, uncertain how to handle the former CEO's unexpected appearance. "Mr. Wilson," one started nervously, "the board has instructed—" "I know what they've instructed," James interrupted, his voice carrying. "But I'm not here as CEO, I'm here as a citizen concerned about what this company, and others like it, are doing to our communities." As more media arrived, drawn by Alicia's initial broadcast, James positioned himself halfway up the steps, Marcus standing quietly beside him. The contrast was striking, the disheveled executive with a black eye, standing next to a solemn child from one of the city's poorest neighborhoods. "My name is James Wilson," he began, his voice stronger than he'd expected. "Until yesterday, I was CEO of this company. I was removed because I began to question the ethics of our business practices." He paused, letting the cameras capture his bruised face. "These injuries weren't from my board, though they might have preferred that approach. These came from trying to help this young man and his grandmother, people from a community that companies like mine have systematically underserved and exploited." The crowd was growing, employees peering through the lobby windows, pedestrians stopping to listen. James could see building security on phones, undoubtedly calling upstairs to the boardroom where Richard and the others were meeting. "For 20 years, I've been part of a system that extracts wealth from struggling communities while claiming to create prosperity. We invest in developments that drive up housing costs and force out long-standing residents. We finance predatory lending operations that trap families in cycles of debt. We counsel clients to minimize wages and benefits to maximize shareholder value." James placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "This is Marcus. He's 10 years old. For the past 2 years, he's been the primary caregiver for his grandmother, who has diabetes and heart disease. He collects bottles for recycling money to help pay for her medications. He administers her insulin. He missed school to care for her when she was too sick to be alone." Marcus looked up at him, then stepped forward with unexpected confidence. "My grandma worked her whole life," he said, his clear voice carrying across the now hushed crowd. "She was a teacher's aide before she got sick. Now her medicine costs more than our rent, and nobody helps except Mr. Wilson." The simplicity and dignity of the boy's statement had a powerful effect. James saw camera operators zooming in, reporters scribbling notes. "The system is broken," James continued, "and I've been part of breaking it. Today I'm announcing the creation of the Second Chance Foundation, committed to providing support for families like Marcus's, families that have been failed by both private industry and public services." He outlined his vision, a foundation that would provide emergency medical funding, educational opportunities, and advocacy for systemic change. As he spoke, he could see Richard and several board members appearing at the edge of the lobby, their faces tight with anger and alarm. "I'm committing my personal fortune to this foundation," James declared. "Every dollar I've earned from this company will now go toward healing the communities it has helped damage." The crowd erupted in applause, journalists shouted questions, and security guards looked increasingly uncomfortable. Behind the line of guards, Richard pushed forward, his face flushed with anger. "This is a publicity stunt," he shouted over the noise. "Wilson is under investigation for financial irregularities and ethical violations." James smiled, having anticipated this move. "I welcome any investigation into my conduct. In fact, I've prepared a complete audit of company practices during my tenure, which I've already shared with the financial press and regulatory agencies." He nodded toward Alicia, who held up a flash drive. "Complete with documentation of decisions that prioritized profit over people, many of which were championed by Richard Collins, my successor." The look of shock on Richard's face was quickly replaced by calculated rage. "Security! Remove him from the property!" As guards reluctantly moved forward, several of James's former employees formed a protective circle around him and Marcus. The cameras continued rolling, capturing the standoff. "You don't have to remove me," James announced calmly. "We're leaving, but this conversation is just beginning." He looked directly into the nearest camera. "To any family struggling with medical bills, educational barriers, or housing insecurity, the Second Chance Foundation is now accepting applications for assistance because everyone deserves more than what our broken systems provide." With that, James took Marcus's hand and descended the steps, the crowd parting to let them through. Behind them, the media swarmed Richard and the board members with questions about James's allegations. As they walked away from the building, Marcus looked up at James. "Did it work? Will they help us now?" "Not them," James replied, watching as social media notifications began flooding his phone, clips of his speech already going viral. "But others will. Sometimes you have to create the change you need." By evening, the story had exploded across news channels and social platforms. From their hotel room, James and Marcus watched the coverage, analysts debating corporate responsibility, interviews with community activists praising the stand, and statements from regulatory agencies promising to review James's documentation. James's phone rang constantly, journalists seeking interviews, former colleagues expressing support, and even a few board members suggesting private conversations about a mutually beneficial resolution. "What happens now?" Marcus asked as James declined another call. "Now we go see your grandmother," James replied, "and then we fight to make sure you can stay with her, with all the support you both need." The following morning, as they prepared to return to the hospital, James received a call from Ms. Harper. Her tone was noticeably different, professional but no longer hostile. "In light of recent developments," she began carefully, "my supervisor has suggested a reassessment of Marcus's case. Your public commitment to supporting families in crisis has attracted attention." "I'm glad to hear it," James replied evenly. "I'd be happy to discuss a proper support plan for Marcus and his grandmother." "We need to meet officially," she continued, "to document your relationship and intentions regarding the minor." At the hospital, they found Eleonora sitting up in bed. Her condition improved enough that the doctors were discussing transferring her to a rehabilitation facility. Her face brightened at the sight of them, then quickly turned concerned when she noticed the news playing on the television in her room, featuring James's speech. "I see you've been busy," she said, taking James's hand, "making powerful enemies." "And powerful friends," James countered, nodding toward Marcus, who was excitedly telling her about the reporters and cameras. As Marcus chattered, Eleonora fixed James with a knowing look. "You found your purpose," she said softly. "Thompson would be proud." On the anniversary of the day they first met, Marcus handed James a carefully wrapped gift. Inside was a simple frame containing the same $2 James had given him that first day, mounted alongside a handwritten note in Marcus's careful script. "The best investment you ever made." James stared at the framed $2 bill in his hands, a lump forming in his throat. The carefully printed note from Marcus read, "The best investment you ever made." The simple gift captured everything about their unlikely journey together, how a chance encounter had transformed both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. "I don't know what to say," James admitted, running his finger along the frame's edge. Marcus shifted awkwardly, a hint of worry crossing his face. "Do you like it? Grandma helped me with the idea." "Like it?" James shook his head, smiling through the emotion tightening his chest. "This is the most meaningful gift I've ever received." He looked up at the boy who had so unexpectedly changed the course of his life. "But you got it backward, you know." "What do you mean?" "You're the one who invested in me. I was just financially rich but bankrupt in all the ways that actually matter." James carefully set the frame on the coffee table. "I think we should hurry. Your grandmother will be waiting for us." They made their way through the morning traffic to the hospital, where Eleonora had been recovering steadily since her surgery 3 weeks ago. The media storm following James's impromptu press conference had gradually subsided, though the Second Chance Foundation continued to attract attention and support. Most importantly, Ms. Harper's threatened investigation had evolved into a collaborative effort to ensure Marcus could remain with his grandmother with proper support systems in place. When they arrived at Eleonora's room, they found her sitting in a chair by the window rather than in bed, a significant milestone in her recovery. She was dressed in her own clothes rather than a hospital gown, her silver hair neatly combed. "Look at you," James said warmly. "Ready to run a marathon?" "Don't get carried away," Eleonora replied with a chuckle that turned into a small cough. "But the doctors say I might be able to go to the rehabilitation center by the end of the week. A real bed in a real room would be a blessing after all this time." Marcus moved immediately to her side, checking her water glass and adjusting her blanket with the practiced care of a lifetime caregiver. "Did you do your breathing exercises this morning?" "Yes, nurse," Eleonora answered with affectionate exasperation. "And I ate all my breakfast, too." James watched their interaction with a mixture of admiration and sadness. The boy had shouldered responsibilities that no child should have to bear, yet had done so with remarkable grace and resilience. "I have news," James announced, pulling up a chair. "2 pieces, actually. First, Ms. Harper has officially recommended that Marcus remain in your custody, Eleonora, with support services in place once you're released from rehab." Relief washed over Eleonora's face. "Thank God. I've been so worried they'd take him." "The foundation will provide a full-time nurse for you both, plus tutoring to help Marcus catch up in school," James continued. "Everything's arranged for your apartment to be made more accessible before you return home." "And the second piece of news?" Eleonora prompted, sensing there was more. James hesitated. "The board of Wilson Financial has reached out again. They want to negotiate my return." "You're going back?" Marcus asked, disappointment evident in his voice. "They're feeling the pressure," James explained. The media coverage, the pending investigations into some of their practices I exposed, the employees who've resigned in solidarity, it's affecting their bottom line. They're offering significant concessions, including implementing many of the ethical reforms I proposed. Eleonora studied him with the penetrating gaze that had lost none of its power, despite her illness. "And what are you going to do?" Before James could answer, a knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Peters entered, accompanied by a nurse pushing a wheelchair. "Good news, Ms. Jackson," he announced. "Your latest tests show significant improvement. If you're feeling up to it, I thought you might enjoy a trip to the garden courtyard. Fresh air does wonders for recovery." While the nurse helped Eleonora into the wheelchair, Dr. Peters pulled James aside. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" In the hallway, the doctor's professional demeanor softened slightly. "I wanted to apologize for my initial suspicions about your involvement with the Jacksons. It's unfortunately common in my position to become cynical." "No apology necessary," James replied. "Your concern was understandable. There's something else you should know," Dr. Peters continued, lowering his voice. "Ms. Jackson asked me not to tell you, but I believe you should be prepared. Despite the successful surgery, her overall prognosis remains guarded. The damage to her heart was extensive, and her diabetes has affected multiple organ systems. With proper care, she could have several good years ahead, but not a full recovery," James finished, the weight of this information settling heavily on him. "She's concerned about what will happen to Marcus in the long term. She's asked about hospice options and legal guardianship contingencies." Dr. Peters placed a hand briefly on James's shoulder. "She trusts you. That much is clear." When they rejoined Eleonora and Marcus in the courtyard garden, James observed them with new awareness. Marcus was pointing out different flowers to his grandmother, who listened with exaggerated interest. Her love for the boy evident in every gesture and response. They had created their own complete world together, a fortress of mutual care against difficult circumstances. Later that afternoon, while Marcus was distracted by a volunteer teaching chess to pediatric patients, Eleonora beckoned James closer to her wheelchair. "Dr. Peters told you, didn't he?" she asked without preamble. James nodded, seeing no point in denial. "He thought I should know. Then you understand why I need to ask you something important." Eleonora took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I need to know what will happen to Marcus when I'm gone." "Eleonora, please, James. I need to know he'll be safe, that he won't end up in the system, bounced between homes or lost in a place where no one recognizes how special he is." James knelt beside her wheelchair, meeting her eyes directly. "I will make sure Marcus is cared for, educated, and loved. You have my word." "Would you—" Eleonora hesitated, then continued with characteristic directness. "Would you consider becoming his guardian, not just through the foundation, but personally?" The question, though not entirely unexpected, still caught James off guard. "Me? Eleonora, I don't know the first thing about raising a child." "Neither did I when my daughter left him with me," she replied with a small smile. "But you learn, and you already care about him. That's the most important qualification." She reached out to grasp his hand. "You need him as much as he needs you. I've seen how you've changed since that first day you followed him home." Before James could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor, Richard Collins, impeccably dressed and looking distinctly uncomfortable in the hospital environment. "James," he acknowledged stiffly, "I've been trying to reach you. Your assistant said I might find you here." "Former assistant," James corrected, standing to face his one-time colleague. "Claire works for the foundation now." Richard's expression tightened. "The board sent me to discuss terms. They're prepared to be quite generous." "This isn't a good time, Richard." "It never is with you." Richard glanced dismissively at Eleonora. The company's reputation is suffering. Clients are asking questions. We need to resolve this situation quickly. James felt a familiar anger rising. The situation is that the company's practices hurt real people. People like Eleonora and Marcus. Any resolution has to address that reality. Richard lowered his voice, stepping closer. Be reasonable, James. The board is offering your position back, plus a substantial bonus. In return, you issue a joint statement clarifying that your concerns have been addressed, and you integrate the foundation into the company's existing charitable structure. So you can control it and use it for PR? James shook his head. The foundation stays independent, non-negotiable. Their tense conversation was interrupted by Marcus's return. The boy approached cautiously, eyeing Richard with undisguised suspicion. Everything okay? He asked James, moving to stand protectively near his grandmother. Everything's fine, James assured him, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. Mr. Collins was just leaving. Richard observed the interaction with calculated assessment. Think about the offer, James. The foundation will accomplish more with the company's resources behind it. He handed James a folder. The full terms. We need your answer by tomorrow. After Richard departed, Marcus looked up at James worriedly. Are you going back to your company? James exchanged a glance with Eleonora, whose eyes conveyed silent wisdom. I don't know yet. It's complicated. That evening, in the quiet of his apartment, James reviewed the board's offer. The terms were indeed generous. Full reinstatement as CEO, increased authority over ethical practices, and substantial funding for community initiatives. A rational business decision would be clear. Take the deal, return to power, and use that position to implement change from within. Yet, as he sat surrounded by paperwork, James found himself staring at the framed $2 Marcus had given him. The simple gift represented something his corporate success never had: genuine connection, purpose beyond profit, the currency of human relationship rather than financial transaction. His contemplation was interrupted by a soft knock. Marcus stood in the doorway of his home office, pajama-clad and hesitant. Can't sleep? James asked. The boy shook his head. Grandma asked you something important today, didn't she, when I was playing chess? James was continually surprised by Marcus's perceptiveness. Yes, she did. Was it about what happens to me when she... Marcus couldn't finish the sentence, but his meaning was clear. Come here, James said gently, making room for Marcus to sit beside him. Your grandmother loves you very much. She wants to make sure you're always taken care of. She asked if you would take care of me, didn't she? Marcus's direct gaze left no room for evasion. Yes. And will you? The question hung in the air, a child's future balanced on the answer. James looked down at the papers from the board, then at the framed $2, and finally, at the solemn boy beside him. In that moment, the decision about the company suddenly became crystal clear. Yes, he said simply, if that's what you want too. 6 months later, on a bright spring morning, James stood at the podium in the community center that housed the Second Chance Foundation's headquarters. Behind him, rows of chairs were filled with the first class of scholarship recipients. 20 children from Marcus's neighborhood, and others like it, all receiving educational support, mentoring, and family assistance. Eleonora sat in the front row, noticeably frailer but beaming with pride as Marcus helped distribute program booklets to attendees. The rehabilitation had given her renewed strength, though James was acutely aware that each day with her was precious. As he prepared to deliver his opening remarks, James felt a slight weight in his jacket pocket. The small package Marcus had given him that morning with instructions to open it during his speech. James felt the small package in his jacket pocket as he stepped up to the podium, scanning the faces before him. The elegant yet accessible hall of the Second Chance Foundation was filled to capacity. scholarship recipients and their families, community partners, donors, and volunteers, creating a vibrant tapestry of hope and possibility. Each face represented a story, a struggle, a dream that the foundation had committed to nurturing. Welcome everyone to the inaugural scholarship ceremony of the Second Chance Foundation, James began, his voice steady with purpose. 6 months ago, this was just an idea born from necessity. Today, it's a living, breathing community of change. From his vantage point, James could see Eleonora seated in the front row, her physical fragility belied by the strength in her eyes. Though thinner and more easily fatigued since her surgery, she had thrown herself into helping establish the Foundation's mission and values. Beside her, Marcus moved with newfound confidence, assisting volunteers and welcoming guests, with the poise of someone who had finally found solid ground beneath his feet. When I first met Marcus Jackson, James continued, gesturing toward the boy, I was a successful CEO by conventional standards. I had wealth, power, and influence. What I didn't realize was that I was morally bankrupt, rich in resources but impoverished in purpose. Chairs creaked, and papers rustled as the audience settled in, drawn by the authenticity in James's voice. Among the crowd, James spotted several former colleagues from Wilson Financial, including a few board members who had quietly reached out after declining Richard's leadership. More surprising was the sight of Richard himself, standing discreetly at the back of the room, his expression unreadable. Marcus asked me for $2 for his grandmother's medicine, James recalled, smiling at the memory. Just $2. It seemed like such a small request, but it opened my eyes to a reality I had spent decades carefully avoiding. The reality that our systems work brilliantly for some and fail catastrophically for others. In the months since James had declined the board's offer to return to Wilson Financial, the foundation had grown beyond his initial vision. Starting with support for families facing medical and financial crises, it had expanded to include educational initiatives, housing assistance, and advocacy work. Each program was designed with input from the communities it served, prioritizing dignity and self-determination alongside practical support. Today, we celebrate our first class of scholars, James announced, gesturing toward the 20 young people seated in a special section. These remarkable individuals have demonstrated incredible resilience, intellect, and determination, despite facing barriers that would have stopped many of us in our tracks. One by one, the scholarship recipients stood as their names were called, each receiving not just financial assistance for education, but comprehensive support, including mentoring, technology access, and family stability resources. The Foundation's approach recognized that talent could be found everywhere, but opportunity could not. Behind each of these scholars stands a family, a community that has supported them despite enormous challenges, James continued. And that's why our foundation doesn't just support individuals. We invest in rebuilding the ecosystems that allow people to thrive. As he spoke, James noticed Eleonora discreetly wiping away tears. Her health remained precarious despite the best medical care, but she had lived to see this day. The fruits of a seed she had planted decades ago when she made that fateful call to Robert Thompson about a little boy named James Wilson. I'd like to share a personal story, James said, his voice softening. When I was a child, my life was saved by the intervention of a brave woman who risked everything to protect me from an abusive situation. That woman is here today, Eleonora Jackson. A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience as James invited Eleonora to join him at the podium. Marcus helped her from her seat, supporting her thin frame as she made her way forward with dignified determination. Ms. Jackson didn't just save me once, James explained as Eleonora reached the platform. When she was fired for reporting my father's abuse, she contacted a mentor who would eventually guide me off the streets and into education. She created a chain of compassion that extended far beyond what she could see at the time. Eleonora stood beside James, her fragility contrasted by the unmistakable strength in her eyes. "I just did what was right," she said simply, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone. "Same as I taught Marcus to do." The audience responded with spontaneous applause, many rising to their feet in recognition of this unsung hero whose quiet courage had created ripples across decades. As Eleanora returned to her seat with Marcus's assistance, James reached into his pocket, feeling the small package that had been waiting there throughout the ceremony. "Earlier today, Marcus gave me something and instructed me to open it during this speech. I think this might be the perfect moment." With careful fingers, James unwrapped the small parcel, revealing a simple wooden frame. Inside, precisely as the outline had specified, were the same $2 from their first meeting, now carefully preserved behind glass. Below them, in Marcus's meticulous handwriting, were the words, "The best investment you ever made." For a moment, James couldn't speak, emotion closing his throat as the simple truth of those words washed over him. The audience waited in respectful silence, sensing the significance of the moment. "Marcus," James finally managed, looking directly at the boy, "you've got this backwards." He smiled through the moisture gathering in his eyes. "You were the one who invested in me. I was just financially rich, but bankrupt in every way that truly matters." The laughter that rippled through the room was warm and understanding, bridging the divide between presenter and audience. As James continued the ceremony, introducing speakers from the community and highlighting the Foundation's future plans, he felt a sense of rightness that had eluded him throughout his corporate career. After the formal presentations concluded, the gathering transitioned to a reception where scholars and their families mingled with Foundation staff and supporters. James moved through the crowd, listening more than speaking, learning from those the Foundation aimed to serve. In a quiet corner, Richard approached, maintaining the professional distance that had defined their relationship for decades. "Impressive work," he acknowledged, gesturing to the vibrant scene around them. "Different from what we do at Wilson Financial, but meaningful." "You could be part of it," James offered, surprising himself with the sincerity of the invitation. "The Foundation needs business expertise as much as it needs compassion." Richard's expression shifted, revealing a moment of genuine consideration before his corporate mask returned. "The board is still hoping you'll reconsider. The quarterly numbers aren't what they should be." "Some things can't be measured in quarterly reports," James replied without judgment. "My answer hasn't changed, but my door is always open if yours does." As the reception wound down, James found Marcus and Eleanora preparing to leave, the day's events having taxed Eleanora's limited stamina. The three had formed an unconventional family unit over the past months, James still learning the complexities of parenting, while Marcus gradually allowed himself to be a child rather than a caregiver. "Ready to head home?" James asked, offering his arm to Eleanora while Marcus gathered their belongings. "This was a beautiful day," Eleanora said, her voice tired but satisfied. "Thompson would have been proud." "Of all of us," James agreed, including Marcus in his glance. Outside, the evening air was cool and refreshing after the crowded hall. As they walked toward the car, Marcus pointed out constellations appearing in the darkening sky, his knowledge reflecting hours spent on rooftops, dreaming of possibilities beyond his circumstances. "You know what I was thinking about during your speech?" Marcus asked, as James helped Eleanora into the car. "What's that?" "All those people you're helping now, they're like the stars up there. You can't always see how they're connected, but they are. And now they're brighter because of the Foundation." The profound observation, from a child who had seen too much hardship, yet maintained his capacity for wonder, reminded James once again why this path, however unexpected, was precisely where he belonged. As they drove through the city toward home, James found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. From a chance encounter on a sidewalk to a partnership that had transformed all their lives. The foundation was growing. Eleonora was receiving the care she deserved, and Marcus was flourishing with proper support and opportunities. While they walked toward their apartment building, Marcus looked up at James and asked with casual curiosity, "So, when do I start learning how to run the foundation? I have some ideas for when you retire." And for the first time in decades, James Wilson felt completely at peace with the future.